where am I going to take it away to? Okay, so this is the way I approached today's topic is I said, what do you guys want to know? Because I know you're all gifted, talented. I know that you know everything you need to know about DISC. What do you want to know? What can I help you with? Because I've been doing this stuff for 20 years and I've been part of TTI for 20 years, and I really enjoy them. But what can I tell you? So Alan,
Sir.
Alan,
Yes, sir.
tell me, what would you like to know that you didn't know before you got on this call?
I would like to know how you use the report. What's special in it for you with your clients?
Okay. All right, Nancy, how about you?
Okay, let me figure. I'm really, it's like I said last week, I don't know what I don't know yet, Chip. I haven't really sat down and figured out where I want to start with it. So any ideas you have about, I guess, maybe it's marketing, how to encourage people to be open about using the instrument.
Okay. Lauren, how about you?
I realize that because you have been with TTI for many years, this might not be the perfect thing for you, but I would, if there were a way to be able to utilize what we knew about Intermetrics and take it to a new level, because I know as the result of my debriefing on my assessment, my TTI assessment, I learned so many new things. The way it was delivered to me was, I think, going to be much better. I think our clients' ears will stay open longer. I think they'll be able to hear more from the TTI assessments. And I would just like to know more about that.
Okay. George, how about you?
Well, Chip, I don't know you that well, but you seem like a pretty smart guy to me. And most of the band was playing to the tune of Intermetrics, and you were playing to the tune of TTI. So I guess I'd like to know why.
Okay. Virginia? How about you? You're still on mute. And you may be frozen. I think she's frozen. Doug? Doug, how are you?
Good, thank you.
It's always a pleasure.
Well, Chip, I feel the same anytime I see you on the line. So thank you.
Yes.
So I missed the first 90-second preamble. What I'm interested in is knowing that I'm going to go through the second day with the of the training here on coming up on Thursday. Similar to some of the other questions that I've heard along the way, are there some times that you're still using some Intermetric stuff, or is there some times that you're still using TTI stuff? Should we keep our ears open for kind of different applications where you prefer one over the other, or have you almost exclusively?
Well, let me just full disclosure. I've never been in Intermetrics. Now, I will tell you that I went through my initial training on Trimetrics with Jay. So I go all the way back when Jay was still part of TTI.
Okay.
Before the whatever.
Great Divide.
Yes, the Great Divide. All right, Mark.
I'll go along with Alan and Nancy and also Doug. I just, it's a general thing about how you're using it, when you use it, and also marketing ideas.
Okay. All right, Virginia, welcome back.
Thank you. So my use of the Intermetrics assessments was typically, once I got an engagement, I would factor them into the engagement. I did use them a little bit in marketing, but not so much. and I use them in conjunction primarily with leadership development or leadership skills related engagements. So I'm just interested to understand how you've used the assessments, and just different ways to think about their use and how they can bring value.
Okay. And Lauren Gamage.
So I'm going to go along with Mark as well. I would love to know some best practices for customer buy-in and the marketing side of it, to get our customers to really be engaged, and then also how to apply that. Especially, I was reading through the adapting during a crisis, because we are still going through that. So I would like to know more about that through the buy-in process.
Okay. All right. So I've got a really good idea of where to go with this, and thank you very much for giving me some direction. I guess so. I've been around TTI an awful long time. Gary Sorrell was the one who recruited me for TTI, and that was way before RAC, the former organization, did any assessments at all. And hey, Cleveland, how are you?
I'm good, Chip. How are you?
I know. Good to see you, or good to hear from you. So when I was starting my business, uh, I didn't get RAC. I didn't get it at all. I didn't get the concept. I had a hard time selling it. I had a hard time figuring out what those little damn white boxes were. I just didn't get it. And I still remember coming to quarterlies and saying to whoever would answer me, because Arnie wouldn't answer me, but whoever would answer me, I don't get it. What am I supposed to say? How do I sell this stuff? And so the first couple of years, I really focused on the TTI stuff because it had such a high face validity. People would look at DISC, and at that time we only had DISC and maybe motivators and a couple of other things. And so, when people looked at the report, they went, "Oh my God, were you taking pictures of me? Were you sitting in my office when this happened?" And so I knew I had a huge high face validity. So I can just talk about the way I started off, and the way I started off was everything was paper at that time. And we had these code locks we put on our computers, and we printed the reports off, but we had to hand input all of the answers. So I would walk out with all these sheets, and I'd give them to somebody at a mixer, and I'd say, "Here, would you do me a favor and fill this out, and then let me come in and talk to you about it afterwards?" And that's exactly how I started. So the one thing I learned really early on is that sampling is huge, and I still do it to this day, and still give out free reports, and I don't care how many free reports I give out, because eventually something's going to hit, and somebody's going to say, "Oh yeah, Chip was the one that did this," and so that's how I started off. And eventually I figured out the formula and all the rest of the stuff. I figured out how it became a part of me and a part of the lexicon, and I finally figured out what being a product of the process was, probably 5 years after I started. I'm a slow learner. Hey, what can I say? So why TTI? And George asked me that question, is why TTI? Well, first of all, it was high face validity. Second of all, I liked the way that they build. They only build on usage, and they build at the end of the month, and it just seemed, at that time, it was a really low barrier entry, and the high face validity. But here's the story, and I might have told it before. I think I was about 2 years into it, and I had a seminar to give on a Friday morning to a junior college board. So it was this board of trustees. I'd been invited in. I was going to do the assessments, and so back in the day, I ordered these books, which were called Discovering Communication. That was the seminar, and it was Discovering Communication, and they had workbooks, and I had ordered these workbooks, and I ordered them plenty of time. They came in, I put the boxes in my office, and I didn't go to look at them until Wednesday night before the seminar, and they were the wrong things. They were Your Attitude is Showing, which is having to do with motivators. And all of a sudden, I'm looking through these books, and it's not Discovering Communication. So I spent, and you remember how arithmetically slow computers were in those days. I spent like the next 24 hours putting together a PowerPoint and a workbook and all this other stuff. I mean, just cut and paste, and and then I was at Kinko's at 4 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning, printing up the workbooks, and I didn't even get any sleep. And I show up at this 9 o'clock, and I did it, and I was a mess, and so I called TTI afterwards. And the lady that I talked to isn't there anymore, but she was great. And I said, I am not asking for a thing because it was my fault. I ordered them plenty of time. I didn't open the box, but here's what happened. And I spent the night at Kinko's and blah, 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 blah. She said, do me a favor. She said, can I call you back in about 10 minutes? And I said, yeah, that's fine. I really don't expect you to do anything. She called me back. She said, I am so sorry that this happened. What we'd like to do is we'll send you the right books, and you can keep The Attitude is Showing, and just keep that as our compliments. And do you have the receipts for Kinko's? And I said, yeah, it was $300 or $400 or whatever it was. She said, we'll reimburse you for that. It's like, damn. And I've told that story. I told that story to Bonstetter, and I told the story to a number of other people. But that just healed. That was huge brand loyalty, and through the years. The other reason why TTI, they do a lot of investment in their assessments. If you notice, the version that just came out in March is different than the version that was last year. The graphics are different. The layout is different. They do that about every 2 or 3 years just to update the look and keep it fresh. They spend, I think, a couple of years ago, their budget for research was $5 million, and so they spent it on doing brain research, and they have done a marvelous job in keeping the assessments fresh and up to date. They constantly check and see if the wording in the assessments, not so much the reports, but the wording of the instrument is still accurate and viable. I know there's been a couple of changes, some minor changes, especially when we're talking about the Hartman value profile, and I don't believe there's been any changes to the disc profile, but they continually update, and I can't thank them enough for that. It's kind of like one of my mottos is Semper Gumby, and Semper Gumby means always flexible. And actually, one of my clients gave me this last Friday because she'd been listening to how I always say Semper Gumby. So, I love it. I love it because it just keeps me fresh and keeps me going and keeps me guessing. And the other thing is that they're remarkably good about accepting feedback on changes. So, when the original Trimetrics came out, I was not on the team that put it together, but I was like the first group that was trained on it, and there were about 6 or 8 different suggestions I had for the report, and lo and behold, they didn't tell me this, but lo and behold, the report came out and they were all incorporated. I was like, wow, That is so cool. And so they do take customer feedback really well and take it to heart. There's a couple of parts of the new format of DISC and driving forces that that included a suggestion or two that I made, and I know there were suggestions from other people, and they're constantly looking for feedback. In fact, I got a call from one of my customer service reps recently, and she was asking about changes. So I think that covers the marketing. The marketing is simple. And here's another thing I did. Again, this is back when really all I had was DISC. The way that, so I don't know if you've heard this story or not, but the way that business started to catapult is I was giving speeches at Rotary clubs in the Charlotte area, and I probably gave Rotary clubs, chambers of commerce, anybody that would say yes, I want to speak. And the way that I did it is that I would pick maybe 5 or 10 people, or I'd ask them to give me the names of 5 or 10 people in the club, and I would have them do DISC assessments. And the typical Rotary speech is about 20 minutes with about 10 minutes of Q&A. So what I did was those 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 people that took the assessment, I would bring them up and I'd start to debrief that whole group, and I'd line them up according to their D score and their I score and all of that stuff, and I'd just have fun with it. And I had my certain ways of describing and certain little, kind of sideways jokes that I tell, and especially when I was talking about C's don't really like to be hugged, and so I would walk to the high C and I'd walk with my arms outstretched, and I said, see that deer caught in the headlights? Look, that's what happens with a C when it's about to get hugged. So I would have fun with it. So I gave one of the speeches, and I picked up some business from that, but I gave one of the speeches at a Rotary Club in Charlotte, and one of the guys there was the head of the Southeastern Warehouse Association, and he came up afterwards and he said, "You're just the kind of guy that needs to come and speak at our convention in this fall." I said, "Great." So I got to know him. I took him to lunch a couple times. I started to get introduced to the Southeastern Warehouse Association, and lo and behold, when the first of all, they didn't go to bad places. That this was at the homestead, I had 2 hours on a Saturday morning to spend with 100 business executives in the room. I mean, what a great opportunity, right? So I did probably, I don't know, maybe $100,000 worth of business directly from the seminar I gave. But the better part was that I met the head of the International Warehouse Logistics Association and the volunteer chair. And that led to speaking at their convention in Las Vegas. Well, I was so broke when I got to Las Vegas. I mean, I stayed with friends, and I didn't stay at the hotel. They were meeting at the Wynn, and in the meantime, what they did is they fired the executive director that I had met. And so they got into a search, and a couple of the guys from the Southeastern Warehouse Association were on the IWLA board and the search committee, and they called me and said, "Hey, them assessment things you do? We'd like you to do that for our candidates." And so I assessed the 5 candidates for the new executive director. And when I was at the convention in March for IWLA, they asked me to come to the executive suite and go through the assessment with the person they selected and tell them how to work with them. I think there were 7 people up in the executive committee. Every one of them ended up being coaching clients or strategic planning clients, every one. And in fact, the new exec for the IWLA was my first coaching client in the logistics business. Because afterwards he would call me and he'd say, what about this? And what about that? And after about 5 or 6 phone calls, I said, you know, Joel, I get paid for this. And he said, really? He said, tell me about that. And so he ended up writing me a check out of his personal account to go with the coaching. So the question, that's how I marketed it, and I still market it that way, and I give away a lot of the reports. The next question was, how do I use the report? And I use the report everywhere. There is not a thing that doesn't start with assessments. So in all of the, so let me describe my business a little bit. I do a lot of work for a company called Haskell in Jacksonville, Florida. They're a design build construction firm. I run a leadership academy. It's a 3-year leadership series. Wendy gets really excited every year when we do LS1 because it's pretty decent order. And so I run LS1, LS2, and LS3. Those are over 3 years. In LS1, I use the disc and driving forces assessment. In LS2, I use the Trimetrics EQ, which is the EQ and the disc and driving forces. And then in LS3, I use the Trimetrics HD, the stress quotient, and the EQ. So by the time they get to LS3, it's the Mac Daddy, because in LS3, what I do is I teach people how to be good coaches. Okay, somebody chatted in there, and I want to be able to get that. Yeah, that's exactly right, Doug. Yeah, they go to Ellis Island. So it's always a part of that. I do about 15 or 16 360s a year, and the way I do 360s is it's a multiple part. So it's not, TTI has a 360 tool, and they don't really spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's called OD Surveys Plus. There's a guy named John Carley who's really conversant in that. So I do a survey instrument, which is the 360 instrument, and I've created a 34 question. I've customized it quite a bit, and it's kind of like the Haskell standard. And then I also do the full bank of Trimetrics HD, EQ, and SQ, and then I do a bunch of interviews and then write a report out of that. So it's more of an executive evaluation than it is a 360. But again, the assessments are part of it. And then with all my coaching clients, I've got 15 coaching clients at that company, and with all my coaching clients, they do the assessment about once a year and see where their temperature's gone, if the stress level's gone up, what their if they've improved. I also do, I've got probably another 25 coaching clients outside of that, and it's assessments. I also have a pretty decent selection practice, so I'm probably doing, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 positions per month that I do a Trimetrics HD and an EQ for selection clients of people that are trying to hire better, and so it's kind of the be all and the end all on the understanding yourself, and see, I use the 5 C's. I came up with the 5 C's. It's no magic, but context, clarity, conditioning, choice, and character. So context is understanding who you are, and I use the assessments in that, when we talk about context. Okay. So any questions so far? Any other questions?
Chip, just out of curiosity, well, thanks for the input on the 360. Are you finding clients typically more open or less open to doing 360s than over the last 10 or 15 years? Are you seeing a pattern there?
Less. Les. So here's the big difference. There are some companies that weaponize their 360s, and I was working with one of those companies for a while, and I realized after the third one, they were just trying to find a reason to fire the person, and they wanted to do a 360 cover their butt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't like that. The one thing I love about doing 360s for Haskell is even if the feedback is horrible, it's a point of development for them. And Cleveland's done a little work for Haskell, and I think you were the one who was saying, or I think you were saying, you know, how enthusiastic they were about development. Well, that's because it's not weaponized.
Right.
So, but if you read all the literature, Harvard Business Review has been pretty scathing about 360s and performance appraisals, especially, and how performance appraisals have outlived their usefulness, and how most modern HR departments don't really like 360s. The way I do them is a lot more thoughtful than just doing. So the company that I was talking about that weaponized them, they're doing an electronic instrument, and they provide all the feedback. In fact, all of the comments, even though the comments aren't attributable directly, you know who said whatever. So why would I want to be, you know, why would I want to be straightforward if I'm a direct report? You know, so is that what you're getting at, Doug?
Yeah, I'm for all the reasons that you cited. I mean, while it should be an incredibly valuable tool, I find that unless it's really done well, it's almost going to create more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah,
kind of where I've come down after all these years.
yeah. That's why I write the report and I don't provide the raw data. And I use the raw data to provide the basis for the report that I write. You know, and I'll be happy to share one of the reports with you if you want. Just ping me and let me, you know, I'll be happy to do it.
Consider yourself pinged. You can redact whatever you want to redact.
Yeah, well, you probably won't know any of the people anyway, so.
It's a pretty small world, Chip.
Yeah, it's a pretty small world.
I might sing barbershop with them.
Well, in fact, you know, what I can do is I have a redacted one where the names have been changed to protect the innocent, and I'll shoot Wendy a copy of that. And Wendy, do you mind? And then what I'll
Either that,
also
Chip, or
do.
just put in the name Doug Brown, do a find and replace it, put in Doug Brown, and regardless of how scathing it is, everybody would believe it anyway.
That's right. That's right. And then I'll also, because there's a set of questions that I ask. So I do an interview with the PBC or the, you know, the subject, and so I tell their story as well through that interview, and then I interview the others, and so I'll send the raw materials out, and please, if you have any questions about it, just don't hesitate to ask me. Any other questions?
Chip, are you doing a lot with TTI benchmarking?
Yeah, hit or miss. So if I've got I've got a company up in Wisconsin that is going to do a benchmark on a position that turns over fairly quickly, and so I'm going to do a benchmark for that. But there's a bunch of positions that are like they only recruit for this position once in, you know, every 2 to 5 years. So it probably doesn't qualify for a benchmark. And I've been doing this long enough. I have a pretty good understanding of, once I talk to the client and what they want and how they want it, I have a pretty good understanding of what to look for in the assessment data.
All right. Is what you're looking for, has that changed much over the years in terms of characteristics that you're paying a lot more attention to the nuances than you used to?
That's a great question. Let me frame the answer in a slightly different way. If I'm doing a selection project, I'm probably paying 10% attention to disc. Because I've learned that we're all successful, we're just successful in different ways. And it doesn't matter if we're introverted, extroverted, etc. Because I've learned that there is no such thing as a perfect introvert or a perfect extrovert. And it's going to give me some ideas of tendencies, but what I really want to know, where I'm going to focus all my attention, is the driving forces, because that's going to tell me where they're drawn to. If I'm hiring a chief executive, I want somebody that's high resourceful, because they're going to watch the bottom line. They're going to pay attention to the revenue clock. When I'm talking about individual debriefs, I pay a lot of attention to disc and driving forces. And so if I do a typical debrief, like I just did a team building with one group, and they all took Trimetrics EQ. I spent an hour debriefing each person on the team, and then we did a 2-hour in person, or not in person. We're still virtual, but we did a 2-hour virtual, with everybody on the call, and I spend an equal amount for the Trimetrics EQ on EQ, disc, and driving forces, and then talk about how it all plays. And have you seen a Trimetrics EQ report? Has anybody seen it? The Trimetrics EQ report. So let me. I'm going to share my screen for a second, and tell a secret on myself. So this is my report, and let me pull it over. So the one thing that I love about, and this is what I did was customize the report so that it's a seminar version. So I put driving forces first, and then disc second. And in this particular report, I cut out a lot of the superfluous material in disc, because I've already debriefed a disc forum in another course. I do this thing called supervisor series, and so I've already debriefed that. Now we're into the next part, but I wanted to make sure that the driving forces and disc were represented, because here's the real beauty part of the disc and driving forces. So these 5 pages, which are potential behavioral and motivational strengths, conflicts, ideal environment, keys to motivating, keys to managing, are brilliant. And the one thing that I keep talking about is that so when you're looking at like predictive index or Myers-Briggs or NEO or Big Five or the Heimlich, or not the Heimlich, the Wonderlic, or it could be the Heimlich, or any of the other, the Hogans, most of them are behavioral instruments, and all they do is stick at a behavioral level. And so the sale for me is that there's so much more texture in when you start to add different sciences. And the way I describe it is if you're walking in front of a statue every day back and forth to school or to work, all you're seeing is the horse's nostrils and the general's face. And that's what your description of that person, of that statue, is going to be, is what the nostrils will look like. But when you start adding nuance to it, when you start adding like driving forces, it's like walking around the statue, and now you see the horse's flanks and the general's butt and things like that, and so you get a more complete picture. So that's why I talk about driving forces and disc together, and I kind of call it assessment, assessment problems when you leave one out. If you're just describing things on disc, you're missing so much texture, and plus you can charge more for behaviors and driving forces. But these 5 pages, when you get into the potential behavioral motivational strengths, almost to a person, everybody reads this and goes, oh my God, this is so accurate. Whereas they might disagree with some of the DISC results, the general characteristics of DISC and the general characteristics of driving forces. They all agree on this. And then the way I describe the conflicts are, these are something that you may know that you struggle with. They may be things that you've handled. They may be things that you've gotten feedback on. But some of these things are things that could or have gotten you in trouble. And then ideal environment is what makes you successful, what conditions must prevail to eliminate stress. And then keys to motivating, keys to managing are pretty straightforward, but wouldn't you like this? Wouldn't you like everybody to know this? And so what I do is ask people to share these 5 pages with every significant relationship in their life. And oh, by the way, the one thing that I do at the end of every seminar is that I offer the opportunity, if someone wants their spouse or significant other to take the assessment, I send them a link. And that way you get a little bit deeper. That makes sense?
Yep.
Now, the one thing about Trimetrics EQ, this is not a Trimetrics EQ, but the one thing about Trimetrics EQ is the last 2 pages of the report is a combination of EQ, DISC, and driving forces. And God, that is powerful. I mean, people just look at that and go, oh my God, you nailed me. Just because the language is really cool and it rounds everything up. And so when I'm doing the debrief, I debrief. I talk a little bit about what's DISC, how does it work. I talk about the driving forces, and then the powerful part is the together. One thing that was suggested to me is, have you seen the behavioral continuum?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not quite sure. This just recently came out. I'm not quite sure I'm absolutely on board with this, but it's fairly self-explanatory once you look at it for a little while. And what it does is the bars are natural style. The star is adapted style. The stars underneath the round, the numbers in the circle, like under direct, it's 76, but 63 is the adapted, right? And the arrow then points for where the adapted is.
And the magnitude.
Yeah. And this just becomes a lot easier to describe too. For a while we talked about highs and lows. It's more distance from the 50% line, and this does a great job of describing distance from the 50% line.
I gotta admit, Chip, I can foresee myself using this one with great ease. I've sent this out, because of the first 90-day, freebie kind of thing. I figured I might as well take advantage of that. So I think I've already sent out 7 or 8 of these already, just in terms of going out and getting my feet wet. Yeah. But I really do see this as even their choice of language in terms of what descriptors they're using on the ends of the continuum.
Yeah.
I see that to be a very insightful, as in INSIGHTFUL conversation, as opposed to an INCITEFUL.
Right. I got it. Yeah, I just haven't used it that much, and so I really need to get into it more. But the one thing I loved about that is that it mirrors this. Mm-hmm. It mirrors the motivational continuum, And I love the motivational continuum. I just, to me, driving forces just is, it's so, I don't know, it's so descriptive. And so if you talk about behaviors as the way you get out of your head into the world, this is what drives you to get there. And I'll
That's
tell you,
pretty
there's,
powerful.
yeah,
That's pretty powerful.
yeah, there's been some big changes. So when I started off in this business, and when Gary Swell had me do it the first time with motivators, I was extremely high altruistic, and I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum, and I was also extremely instinctive, and now you can see at the other end. So the other thing that I just want to share with you is. Oh, which instrument do you give away most frequently? Thanks, Nancy. Disc and driving forces. Back in the day, it was only disc because I didn't get, it used to be called the PAAV, the personal interest, attitudes, and values, and now it's called driving forces. And so, disc and driving forces, I think it's malpractice if you don't do driving forces along with disc. The other thing is that I don't know how much you know about the background of the instruments. I find it fascinating to look into the background.
Spoken like a true high intellectual.
Yeah. So for all the instinctives, just shut me down for a while. But the Marston fascinates me. Absolutely fascinates me. So DISC was based on the work of William Moulton Marston, and if you read the original Emotions of Normal People, which was published in 1928, and by the way was revived and is available from TTI. The one thing that's fascinating to me is how Marston put a lot of things in a I don't want to call it sexual nature, but a power nature. So originally, DISC stood for dominance, inducement, submission, and compliance. Okay, so now put that. So Marston was also the inventor of the lie detector, which I thought was kind of interesting, and he was also the creator of Wonder Woman. And if you look at the original Wonder Woman comics, it was all themes on really kind of S&M. And so, it was a lot about the lasso of truth. Well, do you know where he came up with the lasso of truth? There's a movie that came out, I think it was 2017, called Dr. Marston and the Wonder Woman. And it chronicles Dr. Marston's life. And so he was originally, I think he was a Harvard guy, and his wife was at Radcliffe, and they took a third partner. And the third partner was named Olive Byrne, and she was they were in a polyamorous relationship for the rest of their lives. So Marston died in sometime around the mid-50s. Mrs. Marston lived for another 20 years, and Olive lived with her. And they had kids. Olive Byrne had 2 kids, and Mrs. Marston had 2 kids, and they were just one big happy family. Well, obviously in 1920s or 1930s America, that wasn't really looked at very nicely, and so they were fired from their professorships, and there were all kinds of weird things that happened. But if you look at Wonder Woman and the Lasso of Truth, so the story goes that they were doing some kind of cosplay, and they got involved with this cosplay thing, and Olive put on this outfit that miraculously turned into Wonder Woman, and she was tied up with a velvet rope, and that became the lasso of truth. Weird stuff. I know it's just and just knowing all that weird stuff is just it just enriches it for me. But I don't really tell my clients all that stuff. But it's fascinating, the motivators or driving forces came from a German psychologist named Edward Springer. And he wrote a book called The Types of Men long before we had to be politically correct. And he said that we all see the world, we just see the world in different ways. And so he sought to codify some of the different ways we see the world, and that became Gordon Allport in the 50s did a lot of research along the same way, and then Bonstetter was the one who turned it into an instrument. But the interesting part with DISC is Bonstetter was the first one to really dust off Marston, and he was in Iowa at the time. Before he moved to Arizona, and he would take the information from DISC, and he would go around and start to catalog farms. And so he'd look at this farm and he'd take pictures of the lanes and the way the fields were cut and the trash piles, and he would start to put this whole picture together and start to describe it in behavioral terms. Then he would go into a diner in town and he'd say, what about Farmer Brown? He's like this, and he'd start to reel off the descriptors, and the waitress would look and say, you ain't from around here, are you? And then she'd say, how did you know that? And he knew he had something, and that's how the instrument became the instrument. It was really back in the 70s and early 80s. It was when Bonstetter took that and made something of it. So.
Hey, Chip, not knowing whether somebody else has got a question, if they do, please hop in. How often are you referring to it as an assessment versus an instrument versus a test versus any other? Have you found that your language, in terms of what you call it, has migrated over the course of time?
The instrument is the actual thing that you take. The assessment, I usually say assessment or assessment report. So if you were
offering me something, you and I are having an adult beverage in the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce of your choosing. You don't know me from squat, but for whatever reason, I said something and that triggered you that this might be a potential candidate to do something. What do you call it? How do you get into that initial, hey, would you be interested conversation? What triggers it, and what do you say?
Usually it's a conversation that trends in, self-development or some kind of a leadership development, or, somebody says, what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a coach. Well, great. What team do you coach? And, it's kind of the old hurdlinger thing, and so it's that's the way the conversation starts. But would you, the way that I started is would you do me a favor?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is I'm working on, this was back in the day, but I'm working on this new assessment, and I'd really like some feedback on it. That's how I used to get into it. Now I just say, hey, I do this assessment thing, and I'd love to have a conversation with you. I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. Would you mind taking the assessment and then let me debrief it for you? The power is in the debrief, and that's one thing that Sturgill, or maybe it was Kovitz, that taught me years ago that it. Now I think it was Jerry Hogan. It doesn't matter what exercise you do. It's all about the debrief, and this is the same thing. It's all about the debrief. So it's getting somebody to understand it, but it's having that good line of wrap on how to how to put it all together.
Well, and that's what prompted the question, because I'm wondering if that's where sometimes the nuances of what phrases you've kind of found that have worked for you over the years, and what kinds of things kind of lead you down a blind alley. Sometimes it's helpful to be able to go, oh, you mean all I need to do is swap out this sentence for this one, and I'll get different outcomes. That's what prompted my question.
Yeah, I haven't thought about language in so long. I just, but that's a great question. And Wendy, if you want to set up a debrief, I don't know if it'd be help. I'd be happy to debrief somebody on a webinar and debrief you on the report. But it my my line of patter is not a lot different when I do a group debrief than when I do an individual debrief in talking about the certain behaviors. And the other thing that really helps is there's always part of an explanation, but there's a lot of questions. And so the power in a debrief is how do you ask the questions? It's not about knowing everything about the assessment. It's how do you ask the questions? Does that make sense, Doug?
How do you help them make sense of it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Any other questions? I'm that good?
Cleveland, what question was I supposed to ask that I didn't ask yet?
Doug, you leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you knew the answer, what would it be?
Exactly. That's a Tony Robbins question. That makes people's head explode or get
Yeah.
really angry with you. One of the two.
Well, it's funny because I teach coaching in LS3, Leadership Series 3, and I love that question. And everybody looks at me and like, you can't get away with asking that question. And I said, you would be surprised.
Yeah.
Because once people get done chuckling, they actually answer the question. So it's just having the temerity to ask it.
Yeah, but something also tells me you've learned. I'll bet you anything. You've got a sixth sense that's kicked in terms of when you can ask that question and of whom, and
Yeah.
when you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Comic relief. Anyway. All right, come on. I can't believe I've done that well. You've got to have a question. I know TTI has helped you out with a lot, and I hope you've been through the training. And I know Doug says he's got the second training coming up. Those guys just do a great job, and I understand that a number of you have had the chance to meet Favor Larson, and Favor is just one of my favorite people in the whole world. She's wonderful. Although she will tell you that she is not very people oriented, and as much as we would love to call each other close friends, that doesn't happen with her, and so that's okay. But she is one of my favorite people.
Chip, you started to put a value on driving and disc and so on in terms of you started to talk about 10 and so on. I didn't hear you ever put any numbers around the Hartman piece of that in terms of when you're going for that trifecta, or aren't you using the Hartman that much anymore?
Oh God, I'm using the Hartman all the time. I use the Hartman every chance I get, but I don't use it in seminar work because it's a lot more in coaching and selection. So if I'm doing a typical selection, it's probably 10% on disc, it's probably 20 or 25% on driving forces, and it's probably 50% or better on the Hartman. I make a lot of my
That's kind of where I've settled out over the years as well.
yeah, and then they have that fourth part, which is the D on the Trimetrics HD, which is the DNA of performance. Have you seen that part in the Trimetrics HD? Have you been there yet?
I haven't been there yet.
Okay. Well, the interesting part, it's a rank order list of 25 personal skills.
Yes, I have.
Okay. I heard the best description of it, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I've heard the best description of it the other day when somebody said it's like it's not an accurate portrayal of what you will do. It's a portrayal of what you can do. And the things at the top of the list versus the things at the bottom of the list are like a Porsche and a Volkswagen going up a hill. Actually, probably more like a Porsche and a smart car at this point. Um, but the things at the top of the list, the Porsche is going up the hill and is not going to have any trouble going up the hill. The things at the bottom of the list are more like that smart car that's going to struggle to get up. So when we're talking about the DNA of performance, the things that are at the top of the list we can easily access. And so whenever I'm looking, there are a couple things I'm looking for. I'm looking for personal accountability to be in the upper half. If it's not, if it's below the mean, I'm going to see somebody that is struggling with, everything is somebody else's fault. Goal orientation, self-starting, those are the things that I like to see at the top for just about every assessment that I'm doing selection with. That's kind of like the trifecta.
And are you also using that as a way of talking with people of how to optimize their gifts? That's one thing that I used to do with the Intermetrics a lot. Even though it was time consuming, I would take the last page of the report, the 82 things, and I would basically have them kind of against the norm. I would take of course, now a lot of that's being done automatically from TTI, but I'd basically say, are you a half a point plus or minus of the norm? Congratulations, you're human. But if you're more than a half a point, I would put a single plus. And if you were more than one digit, above the, I'd put a double plus and basically say, hey, these are real gifts that you have. How can you create an environment where you can utilize your true gifts more often? And I tie that in. There was one quote, Dr. Dale Henry, I think his name was, that says, it's impossible for us to wear out our gifts because the more we use them, the better they become. So that to me is just a way of kind of operationalizing those, those skills and opportunities. I've used that a lot with people that are seeking a job that said, you've got an opportunity here if you're interviewing to ask the company that you're interviewing questions that most mere mortals would not. Because if you think about it, I want to make sure that this is a good fit for me and not just a good fit for you, so that you can use that to help them formulate different questions for the interview process than they may normally, think about asking.
Yeah. The one thing I like about the HD report is they report the totals in 3 different ways. So they have that vertical graph that shows the relative levels and rank order them, and then the next one is they have a measure of distance from the mean, and the way they always talk about is, if it's a standard deviation of the mean, 68% of the population, do you fall in, above or below the mean, but it's in that middle, then it's more in the mainstream, or are you in the top 16 or in the bottom 16 of the population. And so the way I always describe that is the middle of the bell curve. And then going to the next, they break it down per item and put the bar graph that has the the mean on it and top 16, bottom 16% of the population.
Yeah.
So yeah, the one thing that I appreciate is just all the various ways they break down the information that make it a lot easier in the debrief.
Yep. Chip, I gotta run. Thank you.
Hey, thank you everybody. Again, I hope I've answered everybody's questions. Wendy, is there anything else that I need to cover?
Nope, I think that's great. Thank you for helping us out with this today and giving some folks some additional understanding of the TTI tools.
All right. Good to see y'all.
Appreciate it. Have a great afternoon, everybody.